Hey, this is Andrew Bostansky, and today we're going to talk about the Sirui 85mm 1.4 Aurora for the Sony E-mount. So I'd like to thank Sirui for collaborating with me on this video. If you have been following this channel, you may have seen me mention my Sony bodies in passing, but I barely ever touch on them. But I think it's time that I start making more content with Sonys because they do pay the bills. They are my main workhorses alongside my Leica bodies. And this 85mm 1.4 has been a welcome addition to my arsenal, and I'm excited to share my findings with you. So let's dive into it. Sirui has been around for a while. I've always known about them. It's from the very first time that I ever looked at getting a high-end tripod. They were there up with the regular household names like Manfrotto. The craftsmanship has always been there, and you see them all over your local camera stores. So it's nice to see that they've been, kind of emerging into the optical world. They have really cool anamorphic lenses that you see people talk about. And of course, they now have this Aurora lineup, which I'm excited to see what they do with these, because it has really been pretty much like using a native Sony mount lens. It feels like a G Master, whatever you want to call it. It feels like a regular Sony lens. It's well built. It behaves wonderfully with the camera. I'd say it's 99% what you would expect. There is one thing that I'll address later on in this video that did make me have to remind myself that it is not a native lens, but we'll talk about that shortly. So first of all, I'll address the build quality and the features of this lens. It is a feature-packed lens. You got 14 elements in 9 groups. You've got a spherical element in here. You've got a 67mm filter thread. You've got 15 aperture blades, which you can declick if you want. There's a switch on the side, on the right side of the barrel. Bang, now it's declicked. You've got the auto click here. You've got an autofocus lock button and a manual focus autofocus switch on the other side. Everything's made out of aluminum. When I got the lens delivered to my door, it was freezing cold outside, and this lens frosted up and it was cold to the touch, which is such a nice thing to experience after touching these plastic G Master lenses for so long. And you would think that this lens weighs more because of its metal build, but you would be mistaken. But this is the lightest Sony E-mount 85 1.4 lens, which is crazy. This is fully autofocus, everything's electronic, really, really impressive lens. Small filter thread too. It's the same filter thread as my Tamron 28-75 that I use for my car photos. And unlike the Tamron, the firmware update USB-C is built into the mount, which is freaking cool. It's got also a rubber gasket, so it is fully weather sealed. The sharpness of this lens is fantastic. It matches the resolution of this 60 megapixel sensor on the A7R5 marvelously. At portrait distance, anything from the minimum focusing distance to, I would say, a couple meters away, like 3 meters away, you're still able to isolate your subject, and the sharpness is still pronounced. That being said, as you go into infinity, I would say sharpness still remains tack sharp in the center, but in the extremities of the frame, that's where you start to see the image quality degrade just a slight amount. Some chromatic aberration creeps in. The edges of the frame at infinity do get a little softer. Stopping the lens down to f4, f5.6, then f8, you get pretty much optimal sharpness around f5.6 to f8, but there is always a little bit of chromatic aberrations at the extremities of the frame. You're not going to notice this in real life. Just like you won't really notice the vignetting. At 1.4 it is pretty pronounced, but at f2 it kind of dissipates rapidly. But I kind of expect vignetting, and I appreciate vignetting with an 85 1.4. It just adds that isolation. Then there's a bit of pincushion distortion, not noticeable once again. Very easy to correct in Lightroom. Simple marginal distortion. Chromatic aberration too. Didn't really notice it, honestly. I've always shot 85mm lenses, and one thing that was synonymous with 85 1.4 lenses are the chromatic aberrations that they incur, and this lens hardly exhibits any. There's a bit in the bokeh, there's a bit of bokeh fringing, and there's a tiny bit as you get towards further distances, but really, you're not gonna notice it. And one of the standout features and reasons that you buy an 85 1.4 is for its ability to isolate larger subjects, beyond people. I'm talking about cars. I've always shot cars. I still shoot a lot of cars. and I took this lens on a torture test on my white car because now it's spring and I really am eager to take it out. And lo and behold, very, very little color chromatic aberrations to account for, which is a welcome surprise. So this is a very modern lens, and I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to mention that quite often during this video because the rendering is very reminiscent of that. Now down to the colors of this lens are kind of punchy. They're a little bit higher on the contrast level, so once again more of that modern rendering there. The bokeh does get pretty busy if you have straight trees at medium to further distances. So I'm talking about a car with trees in the background. You'll notice that it does get a little choppy, but medium distances, very smooth bokeh. Actually, the bokeh in general for portraiture and subjects within 2 meters and closer is actually incredible. Very clean, very three-dimensional, no bokeh outlining on your balls, very few cat eye, and no, oddly enough, onion rings in your bokeh balls. This is a spherical lens at the end of the day. I was expecting to see something, but no. So very smooth bokeh all in all. I think that's why we buy these 85 1.4s. So that right there tells you perfect, because this has the smallest filter thread of any 85 1.4 that I've used, and it still doesn't incur any of the shortcomings that you would expect. Field curvature is also kept at a minimum, so your bokeh still stays very, very, three-dimensional and very modern, right? With where field curvature would come into play, like on my 85 1.4 Zeiss ZF, you get a bit of that more swirly effect, whereas this lens doesn't really have that, which kind of plays into that modern look, which is why I was really happy to see that they offer the black mist filter as an option with this lens when you buy it. I would definitely jump on that. If you can get it equipped with your lens when you buy it, or if it's an add-on, buy a black mist filter for this lens, because it cuts that, that harsher contrast or that modern rendering that you do get from this lens, and it makes it a little bit more classic. And I really like the way this lens rendered with the Sirui 67mm black mist filter. I think it's like a must buy alongside the UV filter. I took some landscape pictures with it at night. It just blew up, it glowed all the highlights of the lights, and it just softened a little bit more of that, that harsher contrast that you tend to get with modern lenses. So I think that was a wonderful thing to have, coupled with the fact that the files from the A7R5 are just lovely to work with. I think this could be a really nice, telephoto landscape lens on top of being a nice portrait/car photography lens. So I mentioned at the beginning of this video that there was one workaround, because honestly the autofocus with this lens is fantastic. It is exactly the same thing as I've come to expect from my Sony lenses and any lens that I've ever tried for the Sony mount. It pairs wonderfully with it. I haven't noticed any shortcomings, other than the fact that if you're using this lens with an electronic front kern shutter, which you should not be using with any shutter speed in excess of 1,000th a second, but if you do that and you stop the lens down, you will actually see a kind of veiled, or I would say a gradient underexposure. Because the electronic front kern shutter is reading out faster than the aperture blades, all 15 of them, can close down, you're actually underexposing the first half of your image. By the time the shutter blades contract to your desired aperture, then the image is properly exposed. So there's actually this kind of underexposed gradient that happens if you do manage to shoot at a fast enough shutter speed for the camera, the aperture blades to not keep up. And you shouldn't be doing that anyway. I posted a video about this on my Instagram a few years ago. What an electronic front kern shutter is rather than having your shutter close, then open and close again to expose the image, but Sony's and most mirrorless cameras in general have the option to have an electronic shutter. So like when you're shooting in silent mode, for instance, it does half of that for you. So the second shutter closes and then you get your exposure. But in daylight, where your readout of your sensor isn't as fast as the shutter speed that you're shooting at, you're getting this weird artifact where your bokeh actually gets cut in half. Maybe you've noticed this in your photos in the past. I sure have, especially with 85 1.4 lenses, which are full of bokeh, right? So this is a electronic front kern shutter. This is a mechanical. So you heard that close, open, close. So make sure that if you're shooting at shutter speeds beyond 1/1000th of a second, always make sure to switch into full mechanical shutter. There you go. I've pretty much just left this camera with a full mechanical shutter on all the time, but I think 85mm lenses are specialty lenses. When you use them, you expect them to work, and this lens does exactly that. It's got the full suite of options, which is what I would expect. Equipping this lens is way less of a financial burden and a weight penalty when you're using it on a second body, because you're just going to be having it on occasion, and that's where this lens comes in handy. I have a shortcut button on my Sony cameras that I just magnify quickly, switch it into a crop mode, and now you get 127mm, give or take, and it doubles as basically a 120 whatever f2 equivalent lens, which is such a nice thing to have. So 85mm lenses have always been my go-to telephoto lens for wedding days, and I usually have a bunch of other primes. So now my go-to for corporate gigs, since I've got this lens at least, has been my second camera with a 85 1.4 and a 24-70, and that's all I ever need, and it works marvelously. And I think that if you're looking for an 85mm lens and you don't want to break the bank, this is such a compelling offer. It's got the smallest filter thread of the bunch, it's the lightest of the bunch, and it can definitely keep up. I'm really impressed by this lens, and I'm excited to see where Sirui goes with this lineup. I'm really anticipating big things for the Aurora lineup, and I'm excited to see what they come out with next, because this is just a compelling lens. I think it's really well made. It's beautiful. It has not let me down, and I've taken thousands of pictures with it. So I'd like to know what you guys think in the comments below. I had the A7R5 for a while now, and I want to make more videos with it. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to chime in below. I could share whatever you guys want to need to know, and I can make videos too on it. So thank you again, Sirui, for collaborating with me. Thank you guys for watching, and if you liked what you saw today, please like and subscribe, because it helps support this channel. See you guys.